My cousin texted, "Your stalker ex just got out of prison and has your address." I froze, staring at the text for 30 seconds before my hands began shaking so hard I nearly dropped my phone. Marcus, after 3 years behind bars, was free, and somehow he'd already tracked me down. He was free. And one chilling text confirmed he knew exactly where to find me. My entire world, the one I'd fought so hard to build, felt like it was crumbling in my shaking hands. My apartment, usually a safe haven, suddenly felt like a glass box. Every window, every shadow, screamed vulnerability. The air grew thick with a dread I hadn't felt in years. Brendan, after 3 years inside, he was out. And somehow, he'd already found me. I mean, I'd moved clear across the country to Denver, changed my last name, scrubbed every single trace of my old life offline. But none of that mattered now. Not if he had my address. My cousin, David, followed up immediately. His text read, "Prison buddy says Brendan's been planning this for months. He's obsessed. You need to run. Now." My little Denver apartment suddenly felt like a stage. Every window a gaping hole. Every shadow a potential hiding place. I scrambled to my laptop, my fingers flying across the keys. Flights. Anywhere. My cursor hovered over destinations, far enough to feel safe, but close enough to drive back if I needed to. But then the old, chilling thought returned, where could I go that Brendan wouldn't eventually find me? He tracked me down before, even when I swore I was untouchable. 3 years ago, I got a restraining order after he broke into my apartment and waited in my bedroom closet for 6 hours until I came home from work. The look in his eyes when I found him sitting on my bed, holding my favorite sweater, still haunts my nightmares. He was calm, almost gentle, explaining how we belonged together, how I'd understand if I just stopped fighting what was meant to be. The police arrested him that night, but Brendan violated the order 17 times in the following months, showing up at my job, following me to the grocery store, leaving gifts on my car windshield with notes about how patient he could be. The final incident happened when I was out to dinner with friends downtown. Brendan had somehow gotten a job as a delivery driver just so he could walk into the restaurant and approach our table. He knelt beside my chair and proposed with a ring he'd made from braided prison commissary bags, speaking loudly enough for the entire restaurant to hear about how our love had survived his temporary absence. The other diners actually thought it was romantic until they saw my face. My friend, Chloe, called 911 while Brendan continued his speech about destiny and soulmates. When the police arrived, he calmly handed over the ring and told them he understood I needed more time to process my feelings. That was the incident that finally got him 3 years in state prison at Riverbend Correctional for stalking and violating a protective order. 3 years that I'd used to build a new life in Denver, thinking distance and time would keep me safe. I called David back immediately. "How did he get my address?" "I don't know all the details," David said, "but his cellmate said Brendan spent the whole 3 years researching you. Had photos printed from your social media before you deleted everything. Knew about your job, your apartment, even your favorite coffee shop." My stomach dropped. "What photos?" "I deleted everything before I moved. Old screenshots, cached pages, stuff friends posted and tagged you in. He had this whole system." His cellmate thought it was romantic at first, until Brendan started talking about how you were just confused and needed to be reminded of what you meant to each other. I looked around my studio apartment, really seeing it for the first time as Brendan would see it. Ground floor, windows facing the parking lot. No security system, just a chain lock and a deadbolt anyone with basic tools could defeat. One exit, through the front door. No back way out. I'd chosen it because it was affordable and close to work. Never once thinking about defensibility. "David," I said, "I need you to do something for me. Call Detective Miller at Denver PD and tell her Brendan is out and has made threats. Tell her I need to reactivate my case file." "Already did that," he replied. "She's on her way to your place now." Relief flooded through me. Detective Miller had handled my original case before I moved, and she'd been the one to suggest I relocate when Brandon's behavior escalated. She understood how dangerous he was and wouldn't dismiss this as paranoia. 20 minutes later, Detective Miller knocked on my door with a uniformed officer beside her. I recognized her immediately, mid-40s, short brown hair, the kind of steady presence that made you feel like someone competent was finally handling things. "David filled me in," she said, without preamble. "We're treating this as an active threat." "How long ago did you get the warning?" "About an hour ago." She nodded and pulled out her phone. "I'm calling this into the task force. Brandon is considered high risk, and his release should have triggered automatic notification to victims. Someone dropped the ball on protocol." The uniformed officer started walking around my apartment, checking windows and door locks while Detective Miller interviewed me. She wanted to know about any contact I'd had with Brandon or his associates, any suspicious activity around my building, any feeling that I was being watched. I told her about the weird phone calls I'd been getting for the past week. Someone would call, I'd answer, and then they'd hang up without saying anything. I'd assumed it was telemarketers, but now it felt sinister. "Those calls started exactly 7 days ago," I said, checking my phone log. "Always from different numbers. Always during the day, when I'd normally be at work." Detective Miller made notes while the uniformed officer finished his security assessment. The news wasn't good. My apartment was what he called tactically indefensible, with too many access points and no safe room to retreat to if someone got inside. "You can't stay here tonight," Detective Miller said firmly. "We're going to set up surveillance on the building, but Brandon is smart and patient. He'll wait until we're not watching, then make his move." "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked. "I can't afford a hotel indefinitely. There's a safe house program for high-risk domestic violence cases," she explained. "It's not luxurious, but it's secure and confidential. Can you pack a bag quickly?" I threw essentials into my largest suitcase while the officers waited. Changes of clothes, toiletries, my laptop, important documents, and the pepper spray Detective Miller had given me 3 years ago, which I'd carried every day since. As I packed, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Welcome home, beautiful. I missed you so much." My hands started shaking again as I showed the message to Detective Miller. She immediately called it in to her text specialist and had me forward the number for analysis. "This confirms he's actively monitoring you," she said. "The timing isn't coincidental. He sent this right as we were discussing moving you to safety." The safe house was a nondescript duplex in a residential neighborhood, 30 minutes outside the city. No signs, no obvious security features, just a normal-looking home on a quiet street. But when Detective Miller knocked on the door, I noticed the reinforced frame and multiple deadbolts. A woman in her 50s answered, introducing herself as Susan, the house coordinator. She had the weathered look of someone who'd seen too much but still cared enough to help. "We have protocols here that keep everyone safe," Susan explained as she showed me to a small room with a twin bed and a dresser. "No contact with outside people unless cleared through me first. No social media, no posting photos, no sharing this address with anyone." The room was basic but clean, with heavy curtains and a window that had bars disguised to look decorative. Susan handed me a prepaid phone and explained that my regular phone would need to stay turned off except for essential calls made through their secure system. "Brandon is technologically sophisticated," Detective Miller had warned me. "He can track your phone's location, monitor your calls, even access your photos and messages if he's installed spyware. We're treating this like he has full access to your digital life." That first night in the safe house, I lay awake listening to every sound. The house had 3 other women staying there, each with their own horror story of escalating violence and failed legal protection. We didn't share details, but the understanding between us was immediate. We all knew what it felt like to be hunted by someone who claimed to love us. Susan had installed a check-in system where each resident had to verify they were safe every few hours by pressing a button in their room. If someone missed 2 check-ins, armed security would respond immediately. It was both reassuring and terrifying to need that level of protection. Detective Miller called the next morning with an update that made my blood run cold. We found Brandon's car parked 3 blocks from your apartment building. He's been there since yesterday afternoon, just watching and waiting. Is he still there? No. The car's gone now, but we found something in the vehicle when we towed it. She paused. Photos of you taken recently. You walking to work, coming out of your building, at the coffee shop on 5th Street. He's been surveilling you for at least 2 weeks. The photos proved that Brandon had found me long before David's warning. He'd been watching, learning my routines, planning his approach. The sick feeling in my stomach intensified as I realized how exposed I'd been, going about my daily life while a predator studied my every move. There's more, Detective Miller continued. We found a journal in his car. Detailed entries about your daily schedule, descriptions of your clothes, speculation about your relationships with coworkers and neighbors. He's been building a psychological profile of your current life. What kind of speculation? He's convinced you're being controlled or manipulated by other people. The journal entries suggest he believes you want to reconcile but can't because of outside influence. He's identified several people he considers threats to your relationship. My mouth went dry. What kind of threats? Your boss, your downstairs neighbor who you sometimes talk to, the barista at your coffee shop who knows your name. Brendan has detailed descriptions of all of them and notes about how to remove their influence from your life. The scope of Brandon's obsession was staggering. He wasn't just focused on me. He'd built an entire conspiracy theory about who was keeping us apart. In his mind, I was a victim who needed to be rescued from the people manipulating me. That level of delusion made him infinitely more dangerous, because he genuinely believed he was saving me rather than terrorizing me. Detective, I need to warn my coworkers if he thinks they're threats. Already on it. We've notified your employer and recommended enhanced security at your workplace. Your boss is cooperating fully with our protective measures. Susan knocked on my door that afternoon and said I had a visitor in the common room. Detective Miller was there with a woman I didn't recognize, blonde, maybe 40, with a kind of sharp intelligence that suggested law enforcement training. This is Agent Davies from the FBI, Detective Miller said. Brendan's case has been elevated to federal level due to his pattern of interstate stalking and the sophisticated nature of his surveillance methods. Agent Davies sat down across from me with a thick file. We've been tracking Brandon for longer than you might expect. This isn't his first victim. My heart stopped. What do you mean? Brandon has a pattern. He fixates on a woman, escalates to criminal behavior, gets incarcerated, then uses his time in prison to plan his next approach. You're the 4th woman he's targeted over the past 12 years. She opened the file and showed me photographs of 3 other women, different ages, different appearances, but all sharing a general resemblance to me, dark hair, similar build, the kind of quiet confidence that apparently triggered Brandon's obsession. What happened to them? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. The first woman, Emily, moved to Canada and changed her identity completely. No contact for 8 years, which we consider a success. The second, Jessica, wasn't as lucky. Brandon found her after his first release and escalated to physical violence. She survived but has permanent injuries. Agent Davies turned the page to show me a police report with photos that made me feel sick. The third woman, Natalie, disappeared entirely. We suspect Brandon abducted her, but we've never been able to prove it or locate her remains. The room felt too hot and too cold at the same time. I was part of a pattern, a type that triggered something dangerous in Brandon's psychology. The personal connection I'd thought we had was an illusion. I was just the latest version of an obsession he'd been refining for over a decade. The good news, Agent Davies continued, is that we've learned from the previous cases. We know his methods, his escalation patterns, his psychological triggers. This time, we're getting ahead of him instead of reacting to his moves. What does that mean? It means we're going to catch him in the act instead of waiting for him to harm you. But it requires your cooperation with an operation that has some risk. Detective Miller leaned forward. We want to use you as bait. The plan they outlined was terrifying, but logical. I would return to my normal routine while being monitored by an undercover task force. When Brandon inevitably made his move, they'd arrest him with enough evidence to ensure he stayed in prison permanently. He's expecting you to run or hide, Agent Davies explained. When you don't, when you appear to be living normally, it will trigger his need to make contact. His pattern suggests he'll try to approach you directly within 72 hours. And if something goes wrong? If he gets to me before you can stop him? That's why we have safeguards in place. You'll wear a GPS tracker and a panic button. Undercover agents will be positioned at your apartment, your workplace, and everywhere in between. You'll never be alone, even when you can't see the protection. Detective Miller handed me a small device that looked like a fitness tracker. This sends an instant alert to our tactical team if you press it. Response time is under 90 seconds anywhere in the city. Susan provided a different perspective when I asked her opinion later. I've seen a lot of women go through this program, she said while we sat in the kitchen drinking coffee. The ones who take control of the situation usually do better than the ones who just keep running. But you need to understand that either choice carries risks. What would you do? I'd ask myself one question, Susan replied. Do I want to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, or do I want to end this definitively? Because Brandon isn't going to stop. Prison didn't cure his obsession. It just gave him time to plan better. That night, I called my sister in Austin and explained the situation. She immediately offered to drive up and stay with me, but I told her that would just put her in danger. Brandon had identified anyone he considered an influence in my life as a potential target. This is insane, she said. You shouldn't have to risk your life to stop some psycho who can't take no for an answer. I know, I replied, but the alternative is running forever, and he's proven he can find me no matter where I go. We talked for an hour, and by the end of the call, she understood why I needed to try the FBI's plan. Not because it was safe, but because it was the only path that might actually end the nightmare instead of just postponing it. The next morning, I moved back into my apartment under full surveillance protection. Agent Davies' team had installed hidden cameras throughout the building and positioned undercover agents in strategically selected units. My upstairs neighbor was actually a federal agent, as was the maintenance worker who'd been fixing things around the complex all week. I went back to work at the accounting firm where I'd been employed for 8 months. My coworkers had been briefed about the security situation and told to immediately alert management if anyone asked questions about me or seemed to be watching the building. The receptionist had photos of Brandon and instructions to call 911 if he appeared in the lobby. For 2 days, nothing happened. I followed my normal routine: work, grocery store, coffee shop, gym, while knowing that trained agents were watching my every move. The GPS tracker felt heavy on my wrist, a constant reminder that I was bait in a trap designed to catch a predator. On the third morning, Agent Davies called while I was getting ready for work. He made contact with your landlord last night, posed as your brother, and said he was planning a surprise visit, asked for your apartment number and whether you lived alone. What did my landlord tell him? Nothing. Thankfully, your landlord knows about the security situation and immediately called our hotline. But Brendan now knows exactly where you live and that you're not hiding. The endgame was starting. Within hours, Brandon would probably make his move. I wore the panic button disguised as a necklace and tried to act normal during my commute to work, though every person on the bus looked potentially suspicious. At the office, I sat at my desk processing invoices and answering phones while federal agents monitored the building's entrances. Around noon, the receptionist called my extension. "There's someone here asking for you," says he's your cousin, David. My blood turned to ice. David was still in Florida and would never show up unannounced. Brendan was in the building, 5 floors below me, pretending to be family. Tell him I'm in a meeting and ask him to wait in the lobby, I said, following the protocol Agent Davies had drilled into me. Then immediately call the number I gave you yesterday. I pressed the panic button and felt the small vibration that confirmed the signal had been sent. Within seconds, Agent Davies's voice came through my earpiece. Tactical team is moving. Stay exactly where you are. Do not approach the lobby. Through my office window, I could see unmarked cars pulling up to the building. Men in suits were already stationed in the lobby, having anticipated that Brendan might try this approach. The receptionist called back 2 minutes later. Your cousin said he'll wait, but he seems really eager to see you. He's asking a lot of questions about your schedule and when you usually leave work. Keep him talking, I whispered, but don't give him any information. Help is on the way. I watched through the window as federal agents entered the building, coordinating with the undercover personnel already inside. This was the moment we'd been preparing for. Brendan was finally making his move, and this time, law enforcement was ready. Agent Davies's voice came through my earpiece again. Subject is in custody. Repeat, Brendan is in custody. You can come down to the lobby now. The elevator ride down felt surreal. After 3 years of fear and months of preparation, it was over in less than 5 minutes. When the doors opened, I saw Brendan in handcuffs, flanked by 2 federal agents. He looked exactly the same as I remembered. Average height, brown hair, the kind of forgettable face that had helped him blend in while stalking me. But his expression when he saw me was anything but forgettable, pure rage mixed with what he probably thought was love, a combination that had always terrified me about him. Sophia, he said as the agents led him past me. You look beautiful. I knew you'd understand eventually. This is just temporary. We're meant to be together. I didn't respond. Couldn't respond. The casual way he spoke, as if being arrested for stalking was just a minor inconvenience in our destined relationship, reminded me exactly why I needed to end this permanently. Agent Davies approached me as they loaded Brendan into the transport vehicle. We found additional evidence in his hotel room. Photos, surveillance equipment, detailed plans for approaching you, plus weapons, 3 knives and zip ties. This was going to escalate to abduction, or something far worse. What happens now? Now he faces federal charges for interstate stalking, violating protective orders, and attempted kidnapping. With his previous convictions and the evidence we collected, he's looking at 15 to 20 years minimum. As the police cars drove away with Brendan inside, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Peace. Actual safety. Not the temporary relief of distance or hiding, but the deep certainty that the threat was neutralized. Detective Miller walked me back to my apartment that evening to collect my belongings. The surveillance equipment would stay in place until the trial, but I was free to return to my normal life. You did something incredibly brave, she said as we waited for the elevator. Most people in your situation would have just kept running. Running wasn't working. He was always going to find me. Not everyone realizes that. You took control of the situation instead of letting it control you. That night, I called David to thank him for the warning that had started the chain of events leading to Brendan's capture. Damn, he said when I told him about the FBI operation. So, this psycho's been tracking other women, too, for 12 years? Apparently, I was just the latest target. Jesus, you know what this means, right? You probably saved whoever he would have gone after next. I hadn't thought about it that way, but David was right. By agreeing to the federal operation, I not only ended Brendan's threat to me, but prevented him from victimizing other women in the future. Agent Davies called a week later with updates on the case. Brendan had been denied bail due to his flight risk and pattern of violating court orders. The evidence collected during his arrest had also connected him to Natalie's disappearance 3 years ago. We found her belongings in a storage unit he rented under a false name, Agent Davies explained. He's now facing murder charges in addition to the stalking and kidnapping charges. Is there enough evidence to convict him? More than enough. Between the physical evidence, his journal entries, and his recorded statements during arrest, the prosecutor is confident about securing multiple life sentences. The trial took place 6 months later. I testified for 3 hours, describing Brandon's pattern of escalating behavior and the fear that had controlled my life for years. His defense attorney tried to paint him as mentally ill rather than criminally responsible, but the evidence of premeditation and sophisticated planning undermined that strategy. The jury took only 4 hours to find Brandon guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 40 years for the weapons charges and attempted kidnapping. During the sentencing hearing, the judge read a statement that captured exactly why this case had been so important. The defendant's actions represent a systematic campaign of terror designed to deprive the victim of her fundamental right to live free from fear. This court finds that the defendant's pattern of behavior across multiple victims demonstrates a level of predatory calculation that requires permanent removal from society. As I left the courthouse, Agent Davies handed me a card with a victim's advocate contact information. "Recovery from this level of trauma takes time," she said. "Don't expect to feel normal immediately just because the legal threat is gone." She was right. For months after the trial, I still found myself checking locks obsessively and scanning crowds for familiar faces. The hypervigilance that had kept me alive during the stalking period didn't disappear overnight just because Brandon was in prison. Therapy helped. Dr. Reyes specialized in trauma recovery and understood how prolonged stalking affected the nervous system. We worked on distinguishing between rational caution and trauma-induced paranoia, developing strategies for gradually returning to normal social activities without ignoring legitimate safety concerns. "Your body learned to treat the world as dangerous because it was dangerous," she explained during one session. "Now, we need to teach it that the specific threat is gone while maintaining appropriate awareness of your surroundings." The process took over a year, but eventually I stopped jumping at unexpected sounds and learned to enjoy activities like evening walks and spontaneous social plans that had been impossible during the stalking period. I kept working at the accounting firm, and my coworkers gradually stopped treating me like a fragile victim who might shatter at any moment. The office security measures installed during the Brandon crisis became permanent features, benefiting everyone's safety. My boss eventually promoted me to senior accountant, citing my composure under pressure as evidence of strong leadership potential. 2 years after Brandon's conviction, I started dating again. It was terrifying at first. How do you trust someone new when you've experienced such a complete betrayal of trust? But Dr. Reyes helped me understand that Brandon's behavior was an extreme aberration, not representative of normal human relationships. I met Michael at a cooking class that Dr. Reyes had suggested as a way to engage in social activities with built-in safety structure. He was patient with my initial wariness and didn't pressure me to share details about my past until I was ready. When I did tell him about Brandon, his reaction was exactly what I needed: anger at what I'd endured, but no attempt to position himself as my protector or savior. We've been together for 8 months now, and he understands that some of my safety practices aren't negotiable. I still check locks twice, still avoid sharing too much personal information online, still maintain the address confidentiality program that keeps my real location out of public records. But these precautions feel reasonable rather than paranoid because they're choices I'm making from a position of strength rather than desperate reactions to immediate threat. Agent Davies calls every few months to update me on Brandon's status. He's been placed in maximum security and has been written up multiple times for attempting to access internet privileges and pressuring other inmates to make phone calls on his behalf. Prison hasn't cured his obsession, but it has contained it permanently. "He still talks about you," Agent Davies told me during her last call. "Still believes you'll visit him eventually. Still convinced this is all a misunderstanding that will get resolved. Does that worry you?" "Not in terms of immediate danger. He's never getting out, and the prison monitors all his communications. But it confirms that we made the right choice pursuing life sentences. His delusions haven't faded at all. 3 years later, I can finally say that my life belongs to me again. I travel without constantly checking over my shoulder. I use my real name on restaurant reservations. I post occasionally on social media, though I'm still careful about location information and personal details. The trauma left permanent changes in how I navigate the world. But those changes feel like wisdom rather than damage. I volunteer now with a victim advocacy program, helping other stalking survivors understand their legal options and safety resources. Many of them are where I was 5 years ago, terrified, isolated, convinced that they're powerless against someone who refuses to accept rejection. I share my story not to minimize their fear, which is completely justified, but to demonstrate that even the most persistent and sophisticated stalkers can be stopped with the right combination of legal action, law enforcement cooperation, and personal courage. The hardest part for most survivors to accept is that taking control requires temporarily increasing risk in order to eliminate the threat permanently. It's counterintuitive. Everything in your body screams to run and hide when you're being hunted. But sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop running and force the confrontation on your terms, with professional protection in place. Detective Miller, who stayed in touch even after the case closed, summed it up perfectly during our last conversation. You turned yourself from victim to survivor to advocate. That progression takes incredible strength, and it gives hope to other people facing similar situations. Last month, I got a letter from Emily, the first woman Brandon had stalked 12 years ago. She'd read about the case in the news and wanted to thank me for finally stopping him. Her letter described years of moving, changing names, living in constant fear of discovery. She built a good life in Canada, but always with the knowledge that Brandon was still out there, potentially hunting her. Reading about his conviction felt like being released from a prison I didn't even realize I was still in, she wrote. For the first time in over a decade, I can stop looking over my shoulder. Thank you for having the courage to end this nightmare for all of us. That letter reminded me why the FBI operation had been worth the risk. It wasn't just about my safety. It was about breaking a cycle of violence that had destroyed multiple lives over more than a decade. By refusing to keep running, I'd not only reclaimed my own life, but prevented Brandon from continuing to terrorize other women. Sometimes the most important battles are the ones we fight not just for ourselves, but for the people who come after us. The scar tissue from trauma doesn't disappear, but it can become a source of strength rather than shame. Every day I live freely is a victory over the person who tried to steal my autonomy and reduce me to an object of obsession. That's worth celebrating, and it's worth sharing with anyone else who needs to hear that even the most terrifying situations can have endings where the good guys win. Sometimes the most dangerous decision is also the only one that leads to real freedom. What would you have done if you were in my shoes?